All right, today we're jumping into a story you've probably heard of. Behind that famous line, "Let my people go." We're digging into the book of Exodus to see what really went down.
So, our whole story today really hinges on Exodus chapter 5. And this verse, it just sets the scene perfectly. See, Moses and Aaron, they're not just asking for a day off, they're asking for the freedom to go and worship God. And you can feel the pressure, right? They're totally stuck between a rock and a hard place. They're afraid of what will happen if they don't do what God told them to do.
Okay, let me ask you something, and I think this really gets to the core of the whole thing. Have you ever tried to do the right thing? Like you were sure it was the right move, only for everything to just get way, way harder? It's so confusing, so frustrating. Well, that's exactly what's about to happen in this story. All right, so let's set the scene. The Israelites are slaves in Egypt. And then God taps Moses and Aaron on the shoulder and says, "I want you to go talk to Pharaoh." And we're not talking about just any leader here. This is the most powerful man on the planet at the time. And it's not a request. God gives them a direct command to deliver. This is not a negotiation, folks.
I mean, can you just imagine the sheer boldness of this? You've got Moses and Aaron, who represent a nation of slaves, walking right into Pharaoh's throne room. And they're not just speaking for themselves, they say they're speaking for the Lord, the God of Israel. They're basically acting as ambassadors for the one true God, delivering an order to a guy who literally thinks he is a god. The tension must have been unbelievable.
And Pharaoh's reaction, it's instant. And it's an absolute no. When he says, "Who is the Lord?" you can just hear the contempt in his voice. In his world, there is no higher authority than him. He doesn't just reject the request, he completely dismisses the God of Israel. And right there, boom, the battle lines are officially drawn. And here's where the story takes a really tough turn. Think about it. Moses and Aaron did exactly what God told them to do. They were obedient. And what was the result? Was it freedom? Deliverance? Nope. It was a brutal, massive increase in suffering for the very people they were trying to save. You know, Pharaoh is clever in a really cruel way. This isn't just about punishment. This is psychological warfare, pure and simple. His goal is to crush their spirits, to make them so miserable that any idea of freedom just sounds like lies. He wants them to be so exhausted, so beaten down, that they can't even dream of a better life. And the cruelty is all in the details. Check this out. First, he tells them, "You have to go find your own straw now," which was a key ingredient for making bricks. But then, in the same breath, he says, "And you still have to make the exact same number of bricks as before." It's an impossible task. He's setting them up to fail, so he has an excuse for the final step, beating them. And the result is just devastating. Pharaoh's plan works like a charm. The Israelite foremen, the ones getting beaten, they don't blame Pharaoh. They turn on Moses and Aaron. They literally say, "You've made things worse for us. You've basically handed Pharaoh a sword to kill us with." All that hope they had, it just curdled into bitter resentment. So, this lands us right at the central question of the whole story. Moses and Aaron did the right thing. They were faithful. So why on earth did their obedience lead to more pain, more suffering, and even rejection from their own people? That's the paradox we've really got to dig into. Okay, so here's the first big takeaway, and it's a tough pill to swallow. A lot of times we think that if we do the right thing, life will get easier, right? But what this story shows us loud and clear is that obedience to God does not always mean immediate comfort. Actually, sometimes following God's plan puts you on a collision course with the way the world works. It can lead to all sorts of tension, opposition, and real, actual hardship. But here's the key. God's bigger plan and the fact that he's with you is way more important than whether you're comfortable in the moment. But listen, this is not a story about suffering for no reason. Not at all. There's another huge lesson here, and it's all about seeing things from God's perspective. Because even in the middle of all that awfulness, God hadn't checked out. He was still there, working out his perfect plan behind the scenes. Think about the two different views. For the Israelites, on the ground, it felt like they'd been completely abandoned. It felt like the suffering would never end. But from God's point of view, this was just one painful but temporary step in a much, much bigger story. The thing is, he'd heard their prayers long before Moses ever showed up, and his timing, as always, was absolutely perfect. Okay, so what does any of this mean for you and me right now? Well, this story is kind of like a roadmap for getting through our own tough times. So how do we actually use these lessons when we're trying to live out our faith and we run into opposition?
Well, here are 4 really practical things we can do. First up, just stay faithful. Keep going, even when things get worse. Number 2, trust what God has promised, not what you see happening around you right now. Third, it's okay to be real with God. Tell him you're scared or frustrated. Moses sure did. And last, but so important, don't try to do this all by yourself. We need to encourage each other when we're facing tough stuff together.
And this prayer really sums up the heart of it all. It's about asking for the faithfulness, the endurance, and the courage to get through it, because we're confident that in the end, God's plans can't be stopped. And that really brings us to the bottom line. If there is one thing you remember from all this, I hope it's this. Real faith isn't about having a life with no problems. Real faith is trusting God without wavering, right in the middle of the mess. So the real question isn't if we'll face opposition, it's how we're going to respond when we do.